Hi, it's Jill Sprott here with this week's Storytellers video from Two Peas in a Bucket. With Easter celebrations just a few days behind us, right now I have holidays on the brain. There are so many ways to document holidays and special events in our scrapbooks, but it can be a challenge to approach these layouts in terms of storytelling. When I think back through holidays, there are stories there, sure, but I often associate holidays with fragments, images, and moments, more than I do with unified stories that have a beginning, middle, and end. In this video, I'll share an approach to storytelling in an unconventional sense, pulling together a bunch of photos and phrases that collectively communicate the spirit of the holiday. In frames and fragments, a holiday is documented. We'll start by taking a look at the mood board for May and its spectrum of springtime hues. As I planned my layout, I selected a variety of papers that included these colors, but I also kept an eye out for patterns that would be fitting for the occasion. When I first started scrapbooking, I read somewhere that using any more than 3 colors on a layout would be unwieldy, but I have since learned that using a variety of colors is possible, as long as those colors complement the photos and are used in small quantities so that they don't compete for attention. After selecting my papers, I gathered together some possible accents to use on the layout. Usually when I gather supplies, I don't really have a clear plan from the outset. I just surround myself with possibilities and move forward from there. I selected these stickers and die cuts from Evilicious, Elle Studio, Doodlebug, Crate Paper, Webster's Pages, and Two Peas, based on their colors and springy feel. I selected a bunch of candids taken during the course of our Easter celebrations and sized them down to 2 by 2. Before I printed them, I also added 3 extra squares, each of which is a section of one of the two-piece printables designed by Wilna Furstenberg. I used the eraser tool in Photoshop to remove some of the wording so that I could replace it with a date stamp later. I played around a bit with the arrangement of the photos on the layout, varying by rows the placement of the pattern squares and of the 3 family portraits that I used. Photos that seemed to have more weight were placed near the bottom of the page. I also decided to keep the egg photo at the center, since eggs are so emblematic of Easter, and the eye just keeps returning to them. The next step was to back each photo with pattern paper to add even more color and energy to the page. The effect of the pattern squares behind the photo squares is a kind of frame that makes each photo stand out even more. Part of what makes scrapping holiday layouts so daunting is the sheer number of photos that are generated during the course of a single celebration. The camera always gets an invite to our celebrations and is often the guest of honor because it comes home with the best stories. This is why I love the multi-photo approach to scrapbooking special events. Together, the photos work the way that memory works, in glimpses and fragments. With so many photos and patterns and colors, however, a layout like this can often involve a balancing act. This is why the background paper matters so much. The greenish aqua polka dot pattern from Pebbles has a springtime feel, but it is delicate rather than bold, allowing for other patterns to be layered over it without the effect being visually overwhelming. In selecting patterns, it's also important to keep in mind that the pattern has to work with the photo that it backs, but it also needs to work alongside the patterns nearby as well. I should also point out that a layout like this is an awesome way to use up those scraps. Usually, I wait to add adhesive to a page until I'm nearly finished or just before stitching something, but in this case, I had to make an exception, since I was preparing to move the entire page and needed everything to stay put. From the start, I knew that I wanted to add journaling around the page, calling attention to individual photos, but the more I looked at this background, the more I wanted to add one more layer to it. So I trimmed it, leaving a border around the photos. Then I faced a tough choice: which pattern paper would work best in the background? Earlier in the video, I mentioned how different patterns and colors can sometimes upstage each other or compete for attention. You can see this here as I consider paper after paper. I finally settled on one that worked, and of course it would be this ledger paper, my favorite paper in the world right now, from Crate Paper. The A side is happy and Eastery, but it's the ledger side, the B side, that allows the colors to coexist harmoniously. I will admit, I really wanted that colorful Easter bunny paper to work as a background, but it didn't. Still, the bunnies found their way onto the layout in the form of a pattern strip. The bunny strip was the first of a few that I added to the layout, along with some of the accents that I had set to the side at the beginning of my process. A layout like this does not leave much room for large additions, but it welcomes colorful bits and pieces that can be tucked into the page to create even more layers. So how do I choose which accents to use? If you notice, I tend to pull things out at first that don't necessarily make their way onto my pages. So what makes the cut and what doesn't? In this case, each accent that made it onto the page played a part in building a mood, in creating a kind of atmosphere. Some items, like the pink tag at the bottom, add color, while others send a message, like the green tab that reads, "This was a good day," because it was. There was candy. I incorporated accents in 2 shifts on this layout. Every item added at this point was done so with the understanding that soon I would be sewing over parts of the layout, and some of these pieces might be stitched over in the process, and that was okay. Accents that I didn't want to stitch over were included later. In addition to the framing effect created by the pattern photo mats, the large block formed by all the photos in the polka dot paper serves as another frame, an effect that is amplified by tucking in bits and pieces here and there to surround the photo block. I included literal frames as well, such as the chipboard and sticker frames from crepe paper, though I removed the chipboard frame prior to sewing. In the process of adding these accents, each individual photo takes on its own identity while also contributing to a unified whole. After working in the last few bits, I added stitching to the layout, creating zigzag stitches across the pattern strips and the title block. To prevent the title letters from shifting as I sewed, I backed each one with a tiny dot of craft glue and smoothed it on with my finger. Just a little stickiness was the goal, so that the letters would stay put as I sewed over them. After sewing, I trimmed the threads, and that was it. I then turned my attention to the journaling. Ah, the journaling. Here's the thing about journaling on holiday layouts. Sometimes it's just really, really hard. You've made 5 or 10 or 15 Easter layouts already. What can you say this year that you didn't say last year or 3 years ago or 10 years ago? My solution? Approach the journaling as you would approach remembering how you celebrated that holiday. Embrace the fragment. The fragment. With a ruler, I drew lines extending from each photo on the layout, and then, pen in hand, I added a little blurb about the photo. This particular Easter did not include any stories with great beginnings, middles, and ends to tell, but it was still Easter. It was still a celebration worth documenting, and that is exactly what I did. I pointed out those things that I will always remember about this holiday. Not all journaling needs to be soul searchingly deep and reflective. I mean, it's great when it is, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it's just enough to make your mark on a page, to note what is, in your mind and memory, worth noting. Interestingly, and without even really being planned that way, the journaling ends up serving as yet another frame on this layout surrounding the photos. The final phase of the process of making this layout was to add those accents that I didn't want to or couldn't stitch over as I sewed. For instance, this metal flare badge from Two Peas in a Bucket would have meant the end of my sewing machine. I was excited to add these cute little bunnies from Doodlebug to the layout. They were calling my name in the Two Peas store a few weeks ago, and now they've found a happy home on this page. So there you have it. In frames and fragments, my Easter layout. Photo by photo, phrase by phrase, it all comes together to document the holiday as it exists in my memory. So don't stress the holiday scrapping, just push on through. And even though the English teacher in me can't believe I'm about to say this, just remember, the fragment is your friend. Thanks for joining me for this week's Storytellers.